Good day and welcome to Mission Control Houston, where activities aboard the International Space Station are being monitored. Today is a very big day for spacewalk preparations as the crew on board the International Outpost makes ready for a spacewalk tomorrow, the second in as many weeks that will be organized to conduct a number of different activities. We have some video that was recorded earlier today as Chris Cassidy and Luca Parmitano made preparations for their second spacewalk of the Expedition 36. This is a video that looks at their review of procedures among the different things that are going to be happening on board the space station. The crew members are going to go outside and continue rigging cables for the future arrival of a Russian laboratory module called the MLM. They're also going to be replacing a video camera on the Japan Exposed facility, which is an experiment platform called the front porch that's on the end of the Japanese laboratory module Kibo. And replacing that will help provide better visualization for experiments that are expected to arrive at the next Japanese cargo vehicle, the Japanese HTV number 4, which is scheduled to launch later this year. They'll also be relocating a wireless television camera system that will make ready for a future relocation of a camera, and that also is going to help make room for some changes in configuration on the station with a possible move of the Tranquility module to a different location. The troubleshooting also will include a bulky door cover over an electronic relay box on the station's truss, and reconfiguring some of the thermal insulation that's on that failed electronics box that was removed from the station's truss last year. This is all intended to make it possible for that work to be done by the robotics experts and the dexterous manipulator system on the end of Canadarm2. This is going to be the 171st spacewalk in support of space station assembly and maintenance. It'll be the fifth spacewalk conducted at the space station this year so far, and the sixth for Chris Cassidy's career and the second for Luca Parmitano. For the upcoming spacewalk, the Chris Cassidy will be EV1, and he'll be wearing a suit with red stripes. And Parmitano, again, will be EV2 and will wear a suit with no stripes or markings. Our NASA television coverage of the spacewalk begins at 6 a.m. Central Time tomorrow. Hope you tune in and join us. This is Mission Control Houston. Again, we're watching some video that was downlinked overnight as Chris Cassidy and Luca Parmitano, tomorrow's two spacewalkers, got ready for that spacewalk. They've been doing a lot of different activities to prepare the tools and equipment and the cabling that they're going to be using to conduct the spacewalk tomorrow. It's expected to be about a 6.5-hour spacewalk with a few get-aheads if we have the opportunity to do that. We do have the lead spacewalk officer for EVA 23 with us. Karina Eversley will be joining us for an on-console interview at 13 minutes after the hour today. A lot of the tasks that were planned as get-ahead tasks on EVA 22 last Tuesday were completed, which means that the team here planning the spacewalks had an opportunity to update the planning for this spacewalk and do some promotions of EVA tasks that had previously been get-aheads into planned tasks, and that also means that additional get-ahead tasks got loaded up on the back end so that if the crew does as well at getting ahead of the schedule as they did last week, we'll have plenty of work for them to do outside tomorrow. Again, we'll have that interview with Karina Eversley coming up at 13 minutes past the hour. Good day and welcome to Mission Control Houston. As I mentioned, we have a special guest with us today, Karina Eversley, who is the spacewalk officer for tomorrow's EVA 23 with Chris Cassidy and Luca Parmitano. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
That's great. Hey, please let's talk a little bit about the spacewalk. We had a very successful spacewalk last week, but that led to some challenges for y'all in terms of scheduling. Tell us a little bit about what you've been going through the last week.
All right. So we had about 3 working days that we added some new tasks in because this is a very fast and efficient crew, and they got some tasks done on the last EVA that we had originally planned to do on this EVA, and the tasks they completed were associated with getting the power and data grapple fixture on the Russian FGB Zarya module ready to go and be used. So we have just a couple of connections to be mated on that now on EVA 23.
And now that is be a new capability for the space station, right?
That's correct.
So that means you'll be able to actually inchworm the Canadian robotic arm over to the Zarya control module for the first time and use that as a base of operations to reach more of the Russian segment, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Tell us more.
All right. So one of the things that we've added in on this EVA is to open what we call the SPDA door, which is it's a door over essentially like the circuit breaker box on the side of your house. It's got several circuit breaker boxes inside of it, and they're very important for space station. And we'd like to be able to do that robotically because they can get out the door a little bit faster than getting guys in suits and ready to go out the door. But it's a little bit unique to try to train a robot how to do that kind of a thing, and they had a little trouble with it. So we're going to go make sure that it's able to be opened and move a little lanyard out of the way that they found when they looked at that just a couple weeks ago. So that's one of the new tasks we'll be doing. And another new task that we'll be doing towards the end of the EVA was a planned get-ahead, which was to replace the forward camera on the Japanese exposed facility. that camera has failed lights. The camera is still functional, but obviously it limits their operational capability without the lights. And the interesting part about that is Chris Cassidy actually installed that camera on his shuttle mission. So he's going to get to go back out and revisit it and install a new camera in that location. So those are our added tasks.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting that we're going to be able to add those tasks and get some important work done. I know that the folks at the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency really want that camera working because they've got some new experiments coming up that are going to be placed on the front porch, as we call it, of the Kibo laboratory, and that'll allow them to see how that is installed and also help them with their robotic operations because they have a small robotic arm that operates on that facility to help tend the experiments.
Right.
So walk us through the timeline here. I know you know it by memory after having built it with your team. Tell us a little bit, step by step, who's going to do what.
Okay, so starting off at the beginning of the EVA, we're going to do some connections on the Z1 truss. This is a continuation, essentially, of a task that was started on EVA 22. There's 2 channels of power capability, and we're adding some Y jumpers that allow the space station to receive power from 2 different sources so that in the event of a failure inside the station, the crew can just demate some connections and they would receive power from a secondary source. So it's a contingency capability.
And then folks have heard about this before. We've had some problems before and they made these connections inside the station. And I think this allows that to be bypassed and go outside, correct?
It actually, the connections inside the space station essentially prevent the 2 channels from coming in at the same time. So they're essentially preventing the power coming from one channel. But EVA, it's set up to bring the power from both sides. So if we have a failure of particular power boxes on the space station, the IVA crew can remove the isolation jumper, they call it, from inside, and that would then allow power to come through from the second side of the EVA jumper.
Okay, so it allows more flexibility in the event we have a problem with one of the power or cooling systems.
Instead of having to do a bunch of power downs inside, they can quickly just switch over to a different power source.
Okay.
So that's the first task that Chris will be doing. The EVA 22, during EVA 22, he temporarily stowed that jumper, and so we only have to do a couple of connections to finish that cable. And then Luca's first task will be to finish those connections I mentioned on the grapple fixture. And then Luca will be taking a cable that he's brought outside for the multipurpose logistics module, the new Russian module coming up. It's an Ethernet cable, and he'll connect that on the forward end of node 1 and then route it all the way back towards the Zarya module. And he'll just leave the end of that connection there where the Russian crew will come by later in a Russian spacewalk later this year, and they'll be bringing cable out that they'll connect there.
Okay, we have 2 more Russian spacewalks scheduled this year.
Yeah, they have several actually associated with the MLM module, some this year and some next year, and it would be during one of those spacewalks that they would finish the connections.
Okay.
And then Luca will go to the SPDA door, the circuit breaker box that I mentioned earlier, the new task, and we'll be watching the 2 crew to see how they line up together. Chris is going to go install some V-guides on the radiator grapple bar that was installed on EVA 22, and these V-guides would be used to install a new radiator. So if one of the 6 very large radiators on the space station that cool all of our systems, if one of those got a leak and had to be replaced, for instance, we have a spare on board, but it's very, very large. It would be moved into place by the robot arm, and the V-guides just allow the robot arm to guide it into place. They help with the guidance. So we're just putting them outside as a stowage location until someday that they should be needed. And then at that point, we need the 2 crew members to meet up at the same place. They're going to take an antenna. It's actually one of 3 antennas that we use for our wireless video camera system, which is our helmet camera view during spacewalks. And they're going to move that to node. It's right now on the top of the P1, port 1 truss, and they're going to move it to the top of the node 2 module. to a new port, and that's essentially the first step in a series of steps to do some reconfiguration of the space station in a couple of years here. Gets that out of the way, then we can move a camera to the port where the antenna was, and then we can move the permanent multi-purpose module over to node 3.
Okay, and so this is for folks on the ground that are computer savvy. This is basically a Wi-Fi antenna, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And once they've moved that antenna, then that's the point when Chris would go get the Japanese camera out of the airlock, and he'll take that over to the Japanese module to replace it. And then Luca is going to go remove some multi-layer insulation from the main bus switching unit that this is the one that failed about a year ago and was replaced on EVAs 18 and 19. It's now located out on the starboard 3 truss on a pallet there. And again, to enable some additional robotic capability, what we're going to do is remove the thermal cover over that so that the robot arm can move it and actually bring it inside the space station using the Japanese small airlock that they have, and then the crew inside will be able to replace or repair that box and then reverse the robotic procedures and send it back outside as a spare. So this is really a unique capability that we've never had before in our space program, is to do some real detailed repair of the boxes that are outside instead of bringing them home and flying up new ones. So that would be...
And that's a unique capability of the Kibo Laboratories. They have that small airlock.
Correct.
And you can actually, it was designed to take experiment samples and put them in and out, but it also can be used for bringing failed parts or parts that need to be troubleshot back into the station so the crew members can work on them.
Yeah, and they're launching some special hardware to be able to do that very soon here. So
okay,
it's kind of neat.
And then where do we go from there?
And then that's the end of the planned EVA. We have a series of get-aheads. Of course, we hope that we'll get to them. These guys, like I mentioned, are very fast and efficient, and so we'll be having a challenge to keep up with them.
Okay. And so we're planning for the spacewalk to last about how long?
It's planned for a standard 6.5 hours, and
okay, and they'll be using the same suits that they used last week. So tell us just a little bit about what they've been doing to refurbish or prepare the suits for use again.
We have to recharge the batteries, for instance, and they regenerate their metal oxide canisters that remove the CO2 from inside the suits, and they get their tools all ready to go. So different tools are used on the different EVAs, and they put the tools away that they didn't need anymore from the first EVA. And then we sent them all the procedures, so they spend a bunch of time reviewing the procedures and looking at the photos that we sent them of these tasks, and especially the new ones that they haven't seen before. So.
And we saw a lot of that documentation. The International Space Station Mission Management Team did a final review this morning and gave the go for the EVA, so I know you guys are happy about that. Tell us a little bit about you, though. I like to try and do that when we have folks here on console that we may not have met. Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? How long have you been at NASA?
I am from Wisconsin originally. I'm a Badger. I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, engineering, mechanics, and astronautics graduate from that department, and I have been in Houston since 1996. I was a NASA cooperative education student for several years while I was in college, so I've been here about 17 years, and I've been in EVA my whole career as a permanent employee because it's just a great place to be.
Great. And so you're going to be helping coordinate all that from here in Mission Control tomorrow morning. So that means you've got an early start of your day tomorrow. Yep. You got a whole team of folks that monitor the suits and the tasks and the overall timeline for the EVA. Would you like to give a shout out to those folks?
I sure would. Yeah, I've got Sandy Moore is my task lead, so she's really the guru on all the details of our timeline. And Scott Ray is also working with Sandy on our timeline. And then in the my EMU back room, the spacesuit is going to be watched by David Simon, and then we have a second person with him who is primarily responsible for watching the airlock systems, but also helps out with watching the spacesuit. So I've got 4 folks back there that are a fantastic team. So
great. Well, Karina, let me thank you very much for coming on the show today. I know you're very busy getting ready for this EVA. We really appreciate you taking a few minutes to explain to our viewers what's coming up, and look forward to having a great EVA tomorrow. And good luck to you and your team and the rest of the Mission Control team that'll be watching along and help make it all happen.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Karina Eversley. Thank you very much for joining us here in Mission Control. This is Mission Control Houston, back with live coverage of the activities here in Mission Control and aboard the International Space Station, where the Expedition 36 crew and the station itself are orbiting about 250 statute miles above the southern Indian Ocean. We just made a southeasterly track over the central portion of the Atlantic Ocean and just off the southern point of the Cape of Good Hope on the southern tip of Africa. This particular orbit is going to be taking the station on a northeasterly course across Africa and the Pacific Ocean. Of course, on board the station, we have a total of 6 people working right now. The commander is Pavel Vinogradov from the Russian Federal Space Agency, who is joined from his agency by Alexander Mazurkin and Fyodor Yurchikhin. We also have American astronauts Chris Cassidy and Karen Nyberg, and Italian and European Space Agency astronaut Luca Parmitano. That 6-person crew is spending most of its day today dedicated to preparing for tomorrow's spacewalk and for going through the procedures. Karina Eversley just left us, and that's because she's headed over to do a private conference with the entire crew that's going to be involved in the spacewalk. Of course, Cassidy and Prometano, who will be doing the spacewalk. Karen Nyberg, who will be serving as the intervehicular activity officer, giving them cues and working with mission control in Houston throughout the spacewalk. And Fyodor Yurchikhin also may be called upon to help out with a little bit of prep as the crew gets ready to go out the door tomorrow. We have some additional video that we were recorded overnight as the EVA preparations continued on board the space station. Let's take a look at some of that now. Again, here's Chris Cassidy from Expedition 36 as he continues to work on getting ready for the spacewalk. Cassidy, as well as Pavel Vinogradov and Alexander Mazurkin, have been aboard the International Space Station for 108 days, 18 hours and 49 minutes so far. They were joined afterward by Fyodor Yurchikhin, Luca Parmitano, and Karen Nyberg. And that trio has been on board for 47 days, 19 hours, and a minute and change. This is a nice view of Luca Parmitano's shoulder as he and Cassidy check a timeline and work on their preps. We saw a little bit earlier he was working with one of the communications caps. Those are also nicknamed the Snoopy caps because of their black and white color. And they fit snugly over the EVA crew members' heads, and then they put their helmets on overhead of that. That helps them have good communication with the folks inside the space station. Of course, Karen Nyberg will be the one talking with them primarily. And with the folks on the ground, Shane Kimbrough, fellow astronaut, will be the spacecraft communicator dedicated to supporting the EVA and helping make sure that all of the updates from lead flight director for the spacewalk and the EVA team get relayed up properly. Dave Korth will be the spacewalk flight director, and of course you just met Karina Eversley, who will be the lead for the EVA team. Crew working inside what's known as the Quest airlock equipment lock. There are 2 different portions of the Quest airlock, which is a cylindrical airlock with a smaller cylindrical tube sticking out of it. The larger cylindrical portion of the space of the airlock also has a number of different storage tanks for oxygen, nitrogen gases that are used to replenish the airlock and the spacesuits inside. And then the 2 spacewalkers, before they go out, actually squeeze into that very very small cylindrical end called the crew lock portion. They go head to toe, because it's such tight quarters in there, and then the crew member who is closest to the door has their head in that direction, and they're the first one to leave the space station. Everything is in preparation. Here you can see one of the extravehicular mobility units or spacesuits without its helmet, as all of its equipment is stashed on a toolbar that is mounted to the front of the spacesuit. The team on orbit at the time this video was shot was in both preparing the suits themselves and getting ready, making sure that all the right tethers and tools are attached to that tool belt, which keeps them all very close at hand. The Expedition 36 crew awakened this morning at midnight Central Time, which is about 5 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, which is the time zone by which the crews operate. It allows the widest expanse of coverage for all the different international partners that are supporting this activity. Commander Pavel Vinogradov started his day off working with one of the Russian experiments on the space station, while Alexander Masurkin did a health check on some other equipment. And Fyodor Yashikin also worked on that experiment. The experiment in question is called BAR, which is a very short acronym for a pretty long name: Choice and Development of Methods and Instruments to Detect the Location of a Loss of Pressurization of a Module. And as you might expect from that description, it is an experiment that looks at how you can best isolate a leak from inside one of the pressurized modules of the International Space Station. Again, that was the first experiment work for Fyodor Yashikin and Pavel Vinogradov today. All three of the American crew members started off with a little bit of break time and some exercise this morning. One of the exercise devices used by Chris Cassidy was the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, which is a space-age version of a bulwarker, if you will, that allows them to use resistance to mimic weightlifting. Even though there's no gravity to press against the weights, they use resistance from cables and other shock absorbers to help provide that resistance. Luca Parmitano, in the meantime, did some work on the cycle ergometer vibration isolation system, which is essentially a stationary bicycle that has shock absorbers so that it doesn't disturb the microgravity environment aboard the space station. Karen Nyberg, meanwhile, did some work with the health maintenance system, doing a periodic health status, data entry, and stowage of some hardware. She started out by doing a pre-spacewalk evaluation for the two crew members that are getting ready to step out the door tomorrow, and did the appropriate examinations. This particular set of examinations did not involve any blood draws, but did a thorough check over of Chris Cassidy and Luca Parmitano to make sure they're looking good for tomorrow's spacewalk. After that, it was moving on to tool configurations, some of which we may be seeing here on this recorded video for the spacewalk. Those were primarily performed by Luca Parmitano and Chris Cassidy, although Karen Nyberg had an opportunity to pitch in as needed, although she was also busy doing exercise. She got a chance to work out on the advanced resistive exercise devices. They were doing those tool configs. Meanwhile, the Russians, Pavel Vinogradov and Fyodor Yashikin and Alexander Mazurkin also had opportunities to get their exercise on various devices. Sometimes they'll use a stationary bicycle that's inside the Russian module. Sometimes they'll work out on a new treadmill that's been installed in the Russian module, or they'll work out on the advanced resistive exercise device. After that point, the crew had a chance to get some lunch, a midday meal, and then it was time for four of the crew members, Cassidy, Yershikin, Parmitano, and Nyberg, to do a thorough review of the procedures planned for tomorrow's EVA. Again, the team has just finished updating and adding some tasks, and so the crew went through and basically did a thorough walkthrough by themselves. And right now they're beginning with the EVA team to do a private conference to go over and ask any questions that they might have come up with as they were doing that review. Pavel Vinogradov, while they were doing that review, was doing some stowage activities, getting trash and no longer needed items tucked away inside the Progress 50 vehicle. Progress 50 is scheduled to undock from the International Space Station at 3:43 p.m. Central Time on Thursday, July the 25th. And that will make way for the launch and arrival of Progress 52, the next Russian spacecraft carrying cargo to the International Space Station, which is scheduled to launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan at 3:45 p.m. Central on Saturday, July 27, and then do a same-day docking with the space station at 9:26 p.m. Central that same day. After those stowage activities, he moved on to an advanced resistive exercise device session, and then he's got scheduled on his timeline a little bit later today some more stowage inside Progress 50. The crew will wrap up its day after the spacewalk conference with some additional exercise. Each crew member shoots for 2.5 hours worth of exercise a day. That helps keep their bodies in good shape, both for the work on board the space station, and it also helps keep their bodies in good shape for the return to one gravity, helping to stave off the potentially detrimental effects of long-term life in microgravity, helping keep their bone and muscle density up. That kind of exercise combined with nutrition on board the space station has been shown to vastly improve the ability of the human body to stay in good shape and not lose any of that bone density and muscle density that's needed to operate once they're back in one gravity, or at least to help them recover it as quickly as possible after they return to Earth. Most crews spend about 6 months on orbit during a common expedition, although we do have one experiment coming up later on in the next couple of years where Scott Kelly and Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko are going to be spending a full year on orbit. That is going to help doctors and scientists with an even better look at what long-duration stays are like in microgravity, with a view toward longer missions that will be required if we go to more distant destinations such as asteroids or Mars.
ВМХ сканер СБ-1. На связи. Леш, значит, визир пилота проверен, все с ним хорошо. С ВШТВ тоже все нормально.
This is Mission Control Houston. That concludes the recorded video we had from earlier today of the preparations of the spacesuits and the tools and equipment for tomorrow's spacewalk. Again, NASA television coverage begins at 6 a.m. Central Time tomorrow for that planned 6.5-hour spacewalk that's going to be doing a lot of different activities to prepare for a new module, the multi-purpose laboratory module, a Russian module that's supposed to be launched in the next year, and will help provide power and data connections to connect that portion of the Russian segment of the space station to the rest of the space station. In addition, will also help with the work on getting some of the equipment on the outside of the space station ready for robotic maintenance so that the spacewalkers don't have to go out and do that. We'll be relocating an antenna that's associated with the wireless camera transmissions that occur as the spacewalkers are outside the International Space Station. That helps give us those spectacular helmet views that we see often. They'll also be rerouting, replacing a camera on the Japanese external facility, which is attached to the Kibo module called front porch sometimes, where experiments look at a variety of different things. Some of them have Earth-facing instruments, such as the hyperspectral imagery system that looks at coastal oceanography, and we just NASA just issued an announcement of opportunity for new scientists to join in using that instrument to look at the Earth's oceans from the unique perspective of the International Space Station. The crew also outside the space station, when they're doing that, will be rerouting some additional equipment and removing some multi-layer insulation to make it easier to access by the robotic activities. And they'll also be taking some additional photos of the alpha magnetic spectrometer, which continues to get millions of particles recorded as it continues its search for dark matter in the universe, which is theorized but has not yet been directly observed. That instrument is essentially a sifter. It sifts through the cosmic radiation and particles that are in the space station's orbit and is looking for firm evidence of what's theorized to make up a large portion of the universe. Both dark matter and dark energy are some of the parts of the universe that we have not yet directly observed, but we believe are there and help to account for the expansion of the universe and what appears to be an acceleration of the expansion of the universe. Meanwhile, as we get ready for a spacewalk outside the International Space Station tomorrow, we're all about training here at the NASA Johnson Space Center, training astronauts and flight controllers for the future tasks that they will accomplish. We have some training going on right now in the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, which is at the Sonny Carter Training Facility just to the north of Johnson Space Center, about 20 minutes. This is Steve Swanson, who is working in a water-prepared spacesuit using umbilicals rather than the standard backpack to perform some tasks for his upcoming expedition aboard the International Space Station. He's out there working with Reed Wiseman. They're in this pool using what's called neutral buoyancy, in which their spacesuits and the individuals themselves are weighted so that they neither float nor sink. This allows them to practice a variety of different spacewalking activities. Of course, there is some current within the water, and they do still have gravity, so when they go upside down, they do still have all the blood rush to their heads, so they try to do a good facsimile of the work on board the space station. And crews generally spend about 7 hours in the pool for every hour they spend outside the space station on a spacewalk, so that they have thoroughly practiced all of their tasks. Today, Swanson, seen here in this live picture, and Reed Wiseman are working on a variety of different tasks. They worked on the airlock exit or egress. They were working on some jumper installations that would enable them to put in jumpers, electrical jumpers between the P3 and P4 truss structure and the P5 and P6 truss structure. Those are on opposite. Those are all out on the port side of the International Space Station's truss structure, which holds those giant solar arrays that generate power and the large radiators that get rid of the excess heat from all the electronic components that are used for the laboratory work inside the space station. They'll also be trying out some work to fill and vent the cooling systems on the truss structure of the International Space Station. That cooling on the outside is done through ammonia, and then it's sent out to the radiators, which in turn radiate out that heat into the vacuum of space. Inside the pressurized module of the space station, the cooling loops are a water-based solution, so that if they were to leak somehow out into the cabin, it would not be a health hazard for the crew. But outside the space station, the cooling is carried in ammonia, which is a much better conveyor of heat and much more efficient way to get rid of that excess heat. Swanson and Weissman also are supposed to be working on some restows and reconfigurations of those jumpers. And then when they get down to the very end of their spacewalk, they'll be practicing ingressing the Quest airlock crew lock and what it takes to squeeze the two of them into that very small space in microgravity. Of course, not actual microgravity, but simulated microgravity. There's no such thing as a zero gravity room anywhere in the world, but this neutral buoyancy technique is about as close as we can come. Back now here in Mission Control, we can watch the team of flight controllers as they monitor systems aboard the orbiting outpost. It is now about 250 statute miles over the Pacific Ocean, tracking northeast toward the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Everything on board the space station working very well right now as the crew on board continues the scientific work aboard the International Space Station and gets ready for tomorrow's spacewalk by Chris Cassidy and Luca Parmitano, the 171st spacewalk dedicated to installation, assembly, and maintenance of the International Space Station, which has been in orbit for close to 15 years now. Today's flight director in charge of the team is Dave Korth. He'll be the same flight director in charge of the team for tomorrow's spacewalk. Steve Bowen is performing the spacecraft communicator duties, talking with the crew as needed on board the space station today. Tomorrow it'll be Shane Kimbrough will be the primary communicator for the purpose of the spacewalk, talking with Karen Nyberg, who will be the internal vehicular activity officer, helping to relay questions and answers and task changes and objectives to the spacewalkers after they exit. Again, we will be planning to forego our regular Space Station Live program tomorrow in favor of the spacewalk coverage, which begins at 6 a.m. Central Time. We'll be back with Wednesday's Space Station Live activity at 10 a.m. Central Time on Wednesday. And then later on that day at 1 p.m., we'll have the briefing for the next crew aboard the space station featuring Mike Hopkins from NASA. With that, we'll sign off for today's Space Station Live. We'll be back with you Wednesday. This is Mission Control Houston.